welcome to another edition of Why Economics Matters. My name is Bob. This is probably the most important video I've ever created. This is the culmination of everything I've been talking about really probably for the last 2 or 3 years, which is chronicling the end of the current economic system as we know it. I've gone into all the history, that this system started in the wake of World War II, was a system born of necessity, the fact that the United States was the last man standing. Every other country had been, nearly destroyed, all of their economic output destroyed, all the gold came to the United States, all the things I've talked about, how it changed. We could call it ended, but it just changed in 1971 when Nixon took us off the gold standard. But the system itself basically has been running unchanged since the end of World War II, and that was called the Bretton Woods Accords. The victors of World War II got together, came up with an economic system that allowed trade to resume as it did prior to World War II, when it all broke down, and then all the destruction that happened. So World War II till today, we've been basically living under the same idea, which is the U.S. dollar has been functioning as the currency of the world. All transactions settle in U.S. dollars ultimately, unless you're trading within your own country. If you're doing anything internationally, the U.S. dollar is the system you're using no matter where you're at. So there is so much fear going on in the blogosphere, call it what you want, the YouTube world, about the end of the U.S. dollar. And I want to address that because I believe I have a completely different take on that, and I'm just not trying to be contrary. Everybody keeps saying how the U.S. debt is the end of the U.S. dollar system, that it's a mathematical certainty that the debt that we are creating is not serviceable and is going to end in the U.S. dollar failing, and on and on and on, and all this whatever. And I get the reflex on that one, because in 2008, I was the same. 2005, I've chronicled this multiple times. I saw what was happening with the housing bubble and how this was going to eventually bleed into, sovereign wealth funds and corporations and municipalities and whatever. And it could bring down the entire world economic system, which it technically did. What I had not factored in, because I was right, all of the stuff I said was going to happen happened. What happened afterwards, I was completely wrong on. As I chronicled, I thought we were going into a Great Depression. The U.S. dollar was going to go to, whatever, was going to collapse, no value, whatever. That part didn't happen. We went into a very deep, obviously, the Great Recession was no walk in the park, but all the things I thought was going to happen, end of our economic system, somebody else was going to take over, probably China, on and on and on. That is the refrain I'm hearing from all of these YouTubers and everything. Same things that I heard back in 2008. They are correct on one half of the ledger. We cannot continue doing what we're doing, which is we're creating debt, and we are expecting sovereign nations to keep sopping it up like they've been doing for the better part of now 80 years, since the end of World War II. We create debt. I went into how the debt creation system works. Japan wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. That has to be done in U.S. dollars. That means U.S. dollars are always in demand. When Japan ends up with all those dollars, they can spend them and buy things that Japan needs. Again, won't go into that whole system. Or what they usually do is they buy U.S. treasuries, which is U.S. debt. Went into that whole thing. All the countries are slowing down on the amount of debt that they want to buy from the United States. Why? Again, I addressed that in my last video about Russia. There's a trust issue that the sovereign nations that are buying U.S. debt are fearful that the U.S. is creating way too much debt, that we're going into a debt spiral. We are afraid that they are going to seize the debt that they have accumulated with the United States, all kinds of different reasons. The Trump administration, again, I will not assign good, bad, or indifferent to it. we'll save that maybe for another episode. This is the system that they are attempting to replace. You have to understand that there is a system that exists outside of the United States that uses US dollars. It's called the Euro dollar system. It has literally nothing to do with the euro, has just somewhat to do with Europe. What this system is describing is a system of the US dollar operating outside of the United States, mostly in what we call third world developing nations, call it what you want. That pool of US dollars eclipses the US dollars that function inside of the United States. So if you want to take anything out of this first part, understand that there is likely 10 times more US dollars functioning outside of the United States than inside of the United States. So let's take an example of what I mean by that. And if you have a friend who maybe grew up in a developed nation like Turkey or Iran or Iraq or Indonesia or India, they will understand this completely, and you will not, likely, initially, because it doesn't make any sense to you. You just use the US dollar. That is what you have always done. You go to the store, they accept it for the most part until you get into times like we just came out of, where inflation is incredibly bad. For the most part, prices are stable. The banking system is stable. There is no reason for you to think about using another currency in your own country, because your US dollar is the pinnacle of the world economic system. Places like Turkey, so let's take an average Turkish citizen as they exist right now. If they are getting paid in lira, which is their local currency, they are facing 33% inflation per year. Think about how destructive that is. If given a choice, the average Turkish citizen has probably 3 different ways that they can keep their wealth. They can store it in a Turkish bank in lira, which again is their local currency, and lose 33% of its value every year. The daily amount of that is, that would be like us, like them per month. The inflation that we had over the course of 3 years, they're facing that on a monthly basis. So, a loaf of bread goes up in price by 33% every year, if not more. They have a choice to store it in a Turkish bank and denominate in lira and lose 33% of their value every year. They can buy gold with it. The problem with gold, twofold, is what do you do with it? It is, easily stolen. What are you're gonna store it in your house, likely, and maybe a vault. All of the bandits, all the thieves know that people are storing gold in their house, so that becomes a gigantic risk. And then also, it's the idea of what do you do with gold? Gold is not easily divisible. Gold is not very easy to use, as we've gone over, historically speaking, is why everybody moved to paper money in the first place, because how do you transact with gold? It's the divisibility problem. How do you break gold up into small amounts to be able to buy a loaf of bread? Your other option is US dollars. There are multiple ways that somebody in Turkey can get US dollars, and I'm talking about physical US currency. I'll go into the other way that people who are maybe a little bit more savvy, a little more rich, a little bit more money, there's other options. The average citizen in Turkey would have to go into the black market. There are people who would transact, would take your US dollar or their lira and give them physical US cash. It's at an incredibly high premium, but that is preferable than losing 33% of your currency's value. And that is the kind of the genesis of the euro dollar system, where US dollars are functioning outside of our US borders. And then once they have those US dollars, they go into the black market. They buy whatever it is they're buying. There's an entire market that is completely denominated in US dollars. That's not just in Turkey. That's in places like India, Indonesia. Literally 2/3 of planet Earth use the US dollar as their primary wealth depository, if you want to call it that. Their sovereign governments and sovereign banks don't see it the same way, because obviously they like the system as it is. They can create inflation that keeps them rich, that keeps them in power. It keeps them with a thumb down on the people under them. They allow the US dollar to function the way it does because it's a release valve. They keep very tight capital controls on their countries, meaning they only allow so much US currency to flow in and out. It's a pressure release, because if they didn't do that, they would have a revolution literally overnight. By allowing the US dollar to function within their countries, people can get the things they want on the black market that keeps them from revolting and stringing them up from lampposts. The problem is that those sovereign nations and those sovereign banks are looking at the United States and seeing danger. Again, just like I said with Russia, where we basically stole $800 billion worth of their sovereign US dollar holdings, basically our US debt. We seized it. That created a ripple across the entire global economy. Anybody who had US debt, all of these foreign banks, all these foreign entities, are panicking because they know now that the United States can use that as a weapon against them. Knowing all that, these citizens, again, at the citizen level, they view the US dollar as value, and they are trying their damnedest to get US currency right now. This is not an insignificant number of people and not an insignificant amount of money we're talking about here. This is literally 2/3 of the global population who is in line to want to buy US dollars, because they want to get out of their local currency, because inflation is killing them. That's the problem. That's where we're at. The United States is printing too much debt. Countries, banks around the world no longer want to buy, again, not at the levels we need. They are still buying US debt. They're just not buying it in the quantities we need. That's the problem. What is the fix? If we follow the direction of every other country, empire that has walked this path, it will end in a debt spiral where the United States will no longer be able to sell its debt to other countries. It was literally the set of circumstances that led us into World War II. Again, the end of the English system. Same thing. They overspend debt, the Thucydides trap, combined with the Triffin dilemma that I went through in the last video. The Trump administration, again, I'm not assigning good, bad, or indifferent. Evil, good. Is it brilliant, evil, brilliant, good? I'll spend another video on that. All I'm telling you is that this is the direction that they are going. I've watched numerous videos now. The video I attached to my Facebook page, and I'll attach it to the comments here, is basically, or literally, the likely next Federal Reserve chairman who's going to take over for Jerome Powell. He wrote a paper, and this video is literally telling you exactly what they are planning. And it is this. Part 2. So we're going to start fresh here. I got to go through a whole new set of language here. This is related to cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, stuff like that. So the term is stable coins. These are cryptocurrency adjacent, we will call it. They are not cryptocurrency. It is not Bitcoin, but it runs on the same, what they call rails, the same system that all cryptocurrency and especially Bitcoin run on. So what are stable coins? Stable coins came out of the early days of Bitcoin, and then the big flood of other, what I call shit coins, but other cryptocurrencies. So the problem people had was they were buying cryptocurrency. So let's say they were buying Ethereum. But they wanted to get out of Ethereum and they wanted to buy Bitcoin because it's superior. Or they'd racked up enough in Ethereum and they wanted to diversify. At the beginning, the only thing they could do was go out of Ethereum into US dollars, with US dollars buy Bitcoin. The problem with that became is that if they made profit on that Ethereum, and the regulations were so vague, the government was very hostile to the whole idea of cryptocurrencies. A couple of companies came out of that idea. So if you want to do your own research, Tether, Tether, and Circle were two companies that would allow you, so you didn't have to go out of cryptocurrency. What you would do is you would buy a stable coin from, let's say, Tether, which is the biggest by far. You didn't have to go out to US dollars. So basically what Tether was doing was they would take your Ethereum and bring it into their Tether stablecoin. And in the background, they were buying US treasuries to keep what's called a peg. So if the Tether stablecoin was exactly equal to $1 US. So if the US dollar started gaining in value, they would have to buy more treasuries. If it started losing value, they would sell treasuries, basically keeping what's called a peg, which is a value of 1 to 1. If you owned a stable coin, you basically owned an electronic digital US dollar. Now, the amount of US treasuries that Tether and Circle were buying up until fairly recently was peanuts, was literally a rounding error in the global economy. Very quietly, or if you were paying attention, not so quietly, the company Tether, with their stablecoin, is now the 16th largest purchaser of U.S. treasuries on planet Earth. And if you have read the Genius Act, which was slipped in as part of the big beautiful bill that Trump just passed, if you listen to the video that I'm attaching to the comments here, which is our next Federal Reserve chairman, he is spelling out clearly the system that they are attempting to implement, and I believe that they will succeed, and the ramifications of it will be nothing less than global changing. Again, not assigning good, bad, or indifferent to it. That will be a different video. This is what is happening. So how this will work is, again, have to understand Bitcoins. Hopefully you'll watch my last video on how Bitcoin kind of works. You can buy Bitcoin anywhere. Again, the idea that you are a bank, you can buy Bitcoin anywhere on planet Earth, from anywhere on planet Earth. I can send value from me to you on the other side of this video without a bank, without permission, without a sovereign bank, without a sovereign country, government intervening in between that. The Trump administration has embraced that idea through the use of stable coins. The system will work this way. You are a Turkish citizen. You want to buy US dollars. The Turkish government has now clamped down, and they are not buying nearly as many US dollars. They are not letting as many US dollars into their system. The black markets are being choked out right now because there is not enough US dollars floating around. This is going to create huge problems for Turkey, but they're caught between an absolute rock and a hard place. So if they allow the United States, if they keep buying U.S. Treasury, that just emboldens the United States to keep spending more and more money, which is going into the military, and there's a whole other geopolitical angle to this that I won't get into right now. Turkey and countries like Turkey are clamping down on U.S. debt and the use of U.S. dollars in their systems. What Trump is attempting to do is to bypass sovereign banks and sovereign governments to allow this Turkish citizen to be able to buy U.S. debt directly. From their point of view, it is a U.S. dollar. Again, because those companies, or it can be done through the U.S. Treasury. When you buy a U.S. Tether stablecoin, you are buying a U.S. dollar. You are basically buying a small fraction of the U.S. debt. Again, from a domestic point of view, from you and I, we're like, why would we do that? I'm not making any money off of it because stable coins don't go up or down. You don't make a profit off stable coins. All it is stable. And from our point of view, we're like, well, what benefit is that to us? This idea is not for us. This idea is for the, again, 10 times bigger market for U.S. treasury or for U.S. dollars outside of the United States. The Trump administration is trying to commodify that, to get rid of the friction of the person having to go to the black market, the person having to go to the Turkish bank and trade lira for U.S. dollars. In this system, they would be able to go onto a website and directly buy U.S. Treasury debt, and to be able to use that in a system outside of the Turkish banking system, outside of Turkish government control. We are talking about tens and tens and tens of trillions of dollars of demand that is going to bypass local banks in their home countries, and they will be able to buy U.S. debt directly. This will fix the entire Treasury problem. So I am here at a checkpoint, so I'm going to push pause for just a second. We'll continue on the other side. Okay, sorry about that. I hit this Border Patrol checkpoint on my way home every day. So you have all this demand for U.S. dollars and all of this friction that is preventing them from getting U.S. dollars. This is no less than a revolution, and I just do not think that the rest of the world understands what is about to happen. And I think they're getting ready to spring this trap quickly, because if people understand, especially sovereign nations and sovereign banks, foreign banks, again, especially places like Turkey and third world nations like that, if you give their citizens a direct method to buy U.S. dollars through treasuries, through these stable coins, money is going to absolutely flow out of these foreign banks. They're going to have bank runs, and we will have them in a trap. And my guess is the next step after that, because we can't let the rest of the world just go into a complete and utter revolution, is that they will then allow those banks to connect to this stable coin system, and basically we will transition from this floating dollar system that is fed by foreign banks, foreign entities buying U.S. treasuries, which they're not doing anymore. They will have no choice but to get on board with this, because if not, if they try and choke off U.S. dollars in their domestic economies, they will be hanging from lampposts, because people, again, are not just going to walk themselves into the dying hole and let themselves die. They are going to rebel. They will be angry. There will be riots, and they will eventually storm the palace walls, and they will hang these people from fucking lampposts. They will be caught in a catch-22, and if they want to keep their banks sovereign, they are risking revolution from their own people, because these people want U.S. dollars, and they are choking off their own people from access to U.S. dollars, which is access to the black market, which is access to the things they absolutely need. Medications, certain foods, spare parts, all kinds of stuff that these people need from the black market is being choked off right now. And revolutions are bubbling all over the globe right now, especially in the developed world. Trump is going to tap into that discontent through the use of stable coins, allowing them, and you'd say, well, why can't they stop it? A country like Turkey would have to cut themselves off from the internet. That is, again, the power of the Bitcoin network and cryptocurrencies and the ledger I talked about, or the blockchain, as it is technically known as. The cryptography to stop the transmission of Bitcoin transmissions, you would have to stop all internet traffic and look at every single packet, as I talked about, as it's going across their routers. They would have to look at every single packet and try to figure out, is this a Bitcoin packet or is this somebody on their Amazon account? They would have to make the decision at that point. Do they want to cut themselves off from the global economy by cutting themselves off from the internet? Or do they want to survive, not be hung from lampposts, and just be a part of this new system that they are creating? If they can act with haste and get this done, they will eventually have to sign on to the system, just like they did post-World War II. They had no choice on the matter. They had no gold. They had no manufacturing capacity. Their people were starving. Revolutions were fomenting all over the globe. The US dollar system post-World War II basically cobbled the world back together again, gave us a common trading medium that we could use to trade across the entire globe. That system is ending. I told you for years now that it is ending, and it is not going to be pretty. This transition will not be pretty. This will not be even. It will not be unchaotic. But it is the best bet that the United States has to continue being the global hegemon that it's been now since the end of World War II. If this is successful, there is no reason to think that we could have another 30, 40, 50 years of, again, I'm going to, again, put it in quotes, prosperity for the United States. This goes back to, is this good, bad, or indifferent? Obviously, if you know my point of view, this is going to be incredibly horrible for the rest of the world. I could probably come up with one scenario where it actually might be very good for the rest of the world, but you have to also accept the fact that we would be on a single global currency at that point. We would literally be using the US dollar directly in literally 75, 80% of the population of planet Earth. That's going way out on the timeline, but that's where this would ultimately lead, is that local banks would have no choice but to be part of this stablecoin system, allowing their citizens to directly buy US dollars, which, said in another way, is basically just a very, very, very small fractional part of the US debt. They would be taking over where sovereign banks and sovereign nations were buying US debt, again, since the end of World War II. Their citizens would directly start buying US Treasury debt. Again, an incredible boon for the United States, and anybody who exists in the United States and in what we call the first world. People who have assets, people who have stocks and bonds and things. The rest of the people will continue to get more and more poor. This is going to fuel more and more war. All the stuff I talked about. So, spoiler alert, from my point of view, we're going to do great as a country. It's going to be at the cost of the rest of the world. Lots more killing and lots more death and lots more military whatever. But that is the system they are setting up for us. That's where we're moving towards. I feel this is going to be done very quickly. I think within the year. Trump is on a timeline. He knows he cannot run for another term. As much as everybody wants to say he's going to do it, he won't. He is going to use this as a do or die. He wants to go down in history in the same breath as Lincoln or Washington or FDR or Kennedy. He wants to be consequential. If he can pull this off, he will be seen as again, maybe you can't see it, but I can. He will go down 20, 30, 40 years from now as somebody as consequential as that. He will have extended the American empire another generation, at least, if not multiple generations. So again, like it, don't like it, that is to me what they are doing. That is reality. You can like it, not like it, but that is what's happening. So hopefully this made sense. I'm going to listen to it. That was a lot to take in, but this is, again, the most consequential video I have ever made. This is it. This is what I've been trying to suss out now for 2-3 years. What is the answer? How do they get us out of this death spiral? This is it. It's, again, evil brilliant. As I've stated in other videos, like it, don't like it, but this is what's happening. So we'll leave it there. And I kept that under 30 minutes, which is unbelievable. And we'll talk to you later, and I'll try to get this up this week.